Hello and welcome to our first seminar of the 2011-2012 school year. I'm excited that you were able to attend and hope that you'll gain some helpful strategies in regards to preventing inappropriate student behavior. I am Jessica Smith and I'm the substitute teacher trainer here at Steady.org. I've been here for about 3 years and have enjoyed helping substitute teachers feel more successful in the classroom. So before we begin, I have just a couple of housekeeping items that I'd like to go over. First being, intermittently I will be asking questions. So if you'd like to answer them, just post your answers into the questions area on your menu. There might be time also, second, there might be time at the end of the seminar to go over a few questions, so you're welcome to submit those questions throughout the presentation and I'll get to as many as I can at the end. And third, we will be recording this seminar so you can view it again at a later date. In the next couple of days you'll be receiving an email with a link to view this seminar. All right, as we begin, I'm going to start out with a question right off, so you're welcome to submit your answers. We're going to be talking about managing and controlling behavior. So what I want to make sure we understand is whose behavior are we trying to control? So go ahead and share your thoughts on the questions area and I'll see what you respond. All right, I'm seeing some people say we're controlling student behavior, which is true, but there's only one person's behavior that I can control, and that's my own. So when we talk about managing and controlling behavior, we're talking about controlling our behavior as the teacher. And when we set up an environment and do things to set up an environment where students can behave well, the increased likelihood of them being on task happens. All right, this webinar we're going to review a few skills that you can implement tomorrow to hopefully make the day a little more successful for you. Now we're talking about and focusing on preventing inappropriate behavior for a reason. And I think Benjamin Franklin said it best when he said an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You'll find that there's not going to be anything really earth-shatteringly new. However, these are very powerful strategies in preventing inappropriate student behavior from even happening in your classroom. So are you ready for suggestion number 1? Here we go. Suggestion number 1 I have for you for preventing inappropriate student behavior from happening is to implement a starter activity. Now this strategy, using a starter activity, should be coupled with greeting students warmly at the door. This is extremely useful for substitute teachers for a few reasons. First, it sets a tone for the day. And once you get students on task, it's easier to keep them on task rather than trying to get them on task again later. So going back to setting the tone for the day, in Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, he refers to a study that teaches us how much time a teacher has to make a first impression. The study took college students and showed them a 10-second clip of a professor, and they had the sound turned off. They were asked to rate the professor just based on this 10-second clip. Their ratings, although they only saw the 10 seconds, they rated the professor the same as the students who had the professor for the whole semester. They shortened these clips to then 5 seconds with the same results. They shortened them again to only 2 seconds, and the results were consistent with the students who had the professor for the whole semester. So this shows us that as teachers, we only have 2 seconds to make a first impression. And that impression will set the tone for the rest of the day. So by greeting students warmly at the door and directing them to a starter activity, you're showing the students that you are a professional and that this isn't going to be a day where they can just mess around. So what is a starter activity? A starter activity is an activity that students can work on individually. Instructions may be written on the board, or a worksheet may be placed at each desk with the instructions on it. For those who have the substitute teacher handbook, you already have access to several ideas for starter activities. These starter activities can be as simple as asking the students to decorate a nameplate that they can have on their desk during the period. Or you can ask them to write about the latest adventure they had with their best friend in about 3 paragraphs. Or asking them to write a song that best describes their life right now and why. Anything fun and intriguing will start the day off on the right foot. Likely the permanent teacher will leave a starter activity for you, but in case that doesn't happen, you'll want to have a few ideas of starter activities in your sub-pack. Some of you might be wondering what a sub-pack is, and we're going to go into that right now. A sub-pack is an emergency preparedness kit for the classroom. And here are some pictures of items you'll find in a sub-pack. First of all, you need a bag that you can carry around that's easy to manage. Some teachers do like rolly suitcases that they can take in and out of the classroom so it doesn't injure their back. Included, we always encourage that the substitute teacher handbook be included in your sub-pack. You'll also see office supplies, the pencils, scissors, tape, staplers, things that should be in a classroom, but when you need them most, they just don't happen to be there. You'll also see the plastic gloves in case you find yourself in a situation where you're coming in contact with bodily fluids. On there we have stickers, and we'll talk a lot later in this webinar about praising and recognizing appropriate behavior. And so these stickers or tickets, anything you have to help you reward appropriate behavior. You'll also see the sticky notes. These sticky notes you can write students' names on and then place them in a file folder in the order of their seating chart so you can know students' names. And if you happen to move a student, it's easy to move these sticky notes around in that file folder. In the other file folders, you'll notice there's 3 on there. We encourage having extra activities, so filler activities, as well as district policies. You want your district policies near you so you can read them during your downtime. Now likely a lot of you already have a sub-pack. So if you do have a sub-pack, what are other things that you have in your sub-pack that you find to be useful? All right, I'm seeing a few responses come in. I'll give you a few more seconds to answer. Some great things. I see crayons, snacks for the substitute teacher throughout the day. That's a good idea for sure. Glue sticks, calculators, tickets for rewards, substitute teacher reports. Great. Band-aids. Now there's a sub who's had some experience. One time I was doing a training and a gentleman was showing the stuff he had in his sub-pack, and he pulled out a wrench. And I said, what experience have you had to tell you that you needed a wrench in your sub-pack? And he said, well, when I go to the school, I see windows and things that just need a little bit of adjusting. So he takes his wrench along to help out the school. I thought that was kind of interesting. If you would like to learn more about what a subpack is, I would encourage you to visit the Bus Stop blog and search subpack for more information. Now going back to starter activities. There are a lot of places where you can find starter activities. We know it's an activity that students can work on individually and something that you can direct them to at the start of class. This helps interruptions when you're taking roll or when announcements come on. It just gives them a way to be on task without being interrupted or going back on task after the interruptions happen. So one of the best places for finding starter activities is the Substitute Teacher Handbook. The Bus Stop blog, you'll find several activities that you can use. The Sub-Suggestions newsletter. For those who are not familiar with the Sub-Suggestions newsletter, it's for substitute teachers. It comes out weekly, and it'll have tips and suggestions for you. At least once a month, you'll find links to activities to include in your subpack. And lastly, of course, we encourage you to get to know other substitute teachers and share your ideas. So my first suggestion for you was to greet students warmly at the door and direct them to a starter activity. The second suggestion for preventing inappropriate student behavior is to use proximity. Proximity means you're continually walking around the classroom and you're near to the students. Now, why do you think this is such an important strategy? All right, I'll give you a few seconds to answer that question. Wow, some great comments are being shared. When substitute teachers walk around, students are less likely to misbehave, and that's exactly right. The people who understand proximity the best, I think, are police officers. They just park their car on the side of the road and all of a sudden everyone complies with the speed limit. The closer a sub is to the students, the more the students realize the sub means business. That is true. We'll talk later about when the teacher is on task, the students are more likely to be on task. Recently, in a Sub-Suggestions newsletter, I shared a story about the power of this strategy. A behavior specialist walked into a classroom unannounced and asked the teacher if he could observe during the class period. He was wanting to look for off-task behavior because she was working with the most behaviorally challenged students in the school. The teacher said, "Oh, you're more than welcome to come observe." As the behavior specialist was taking notes on off-task behavior, he realized he didn't have any notes. The students were on task 100% of the time. The observer, of course, was floored by this and afterwards asked the teacher, "How do you do it?" She responded by saying, "Simple. I don't sit down. I don't even have a desk." He looked around the classroom and sure enough, she didn't even have a desk. When I was teaching, I would wear a pedometer so that I could count my steps, and I found this to be super motivating. One day, I got to 10,000 steps, and I was so proud of myself. Dr. Fred Jones, in his book Tools for Teaching, spends the majority of the time discussing this strategy alone, which just confirms how powerful it can be. All right, the third suggestion for you for preventing inappropriate student behavior is to recognize and praise appropriate behavior. Believe it or not, the biggest reinforcer to behavior is teacher attention. The behavior that teachers spend most of the time recognizing in the classroom is the behavior that's going to prevail. When you're walking around the classroom and using proximity, this is to catch students being good, not to look for students who are off task. It's important to acknowledge when students have met your expectations, and you can do this really simply by smiling at the student, saying a quick thank you, or handing out a tangible reward like a ticket or a sticker. Because my background is in secondary education, I can tell you how powerful this is. for the high school level. I had a 17-year-old senior who was in my class, and he had his pants wrapped around his knees, and he had about a 3% in my class, so he obviously wasn't motivated by grades. He noticed I had some star stickers on my desk, and he asked, "Hey, Miss Smith, what are those stickers for?" I told him that they were for the students who finished their assignment. I also worked with preschoolers at the high school, and they were actually for the preschoolers, but I told him they were for those who finished their assignment. He came up to me a few minutes later with his work, and it was immaculately done, and he said, "Hey, can I get my sticker now?" I think after that his grades went up to a 4% in my class. I had another student in another class period who had a really low percentage in my class as well, and she would not participate in any of the work. And she often sat expressionless in my class. I had no idea what was going on inside of her. I asked her to stay after class one day because I knew she was smart, and I thought she might just be acting. And I asked her, "I know you're capable of doing the assignment, and I want to make sure you first understand the assignment." So I asked her what she understood the expectations of the assignment to be. She told me with perfect clarity. I then asked her to work on the first problem while I straightened the desks. I came back and saw it was done perfectly. I was amazed and told her so. I thanked her for her work and said how impressed I was with it. I then asked her to do the second problem. She completed it in half the time it took her to do the first. Again, I was so ecstatic that she was working so well and doing more in my class than I'd ever seen. And she was recalling the information that we had learned several days before with perfect clarity. The next thing that happened thrilled me to the bone. It was one of the major triumphs, I would say, of my teaching career. As I mentioned earlier, she was expressionless in my class. She would not respond to anything. But after she completed that second problem, she smiled. It was the first sign of life I had seen in the student all year. I said to her it was okay to be proud of her work because she was doing a really great job. I can't say that from here on out she completed her work perfectly and became a straight-A student, but I can say that she smiled that one day. She showed a little more confidence in life and tried a little harder the rest of the semester, however. I tell you these two stories to show you that what is rewarding to one student isn't rewarding to another. In the second story, I also point out that I didn't praise the student to that extent in front of other class members for a reason. Praise can sometimes, when it's really a lot of praise, can become embarrassing for the student, and therefore it becomes a negative negative interaction. Dr. Todd Whitaker, in his book, before we move on, leave a list of students who are particularly helpful and on task for the permanent teacher. This will set the tone to help you recognize and praise appropriate behavior. In the book, What Great Teachers Do Differently, Dr. Todd Whitaker discusses some conditions of praise. We don't want to make the students what researchers call praise junkies, so it's important to know these expectations. The first condition of praise, according to Dr. Whitaker, is that praise needs to be authentic. We need to praise students for what we genuinely appreciate. It also needs to be specific, rather than giving students a general good job. It needs to be immediate after the behavior happens, and it must be clean, meaning it can't include a however statement. I appreciate you handing that assignment in, however you weren't on time to class. And it also should be private, as for reasons we explained earlier. The fourth and last suggestion I have for you today is for preventing inappropriate student behavior is to clearly communicate your expectations. If you've ever watched an episode of Nanny 911 or Super Nanny, these are shows where families call in and say they need help parents will need help gaining control over their kids again, so these nannies come in to the rescue. And the first thing they do is set rules. Often the house doesn't even have any rules, but they'll set rules and then a way to positively reward students or the kids for complying. When we aren't clear in setting our expectations, we cause students to be disruptive. And I'm not talking about that they start asking each other questions about what they are supposed to be doing. They start becoming defiant for the reason that students would rather look bad than stupid. When you set clear expectations and recognize students who meet those expectations, we're increasing the likelihood that a student will behave well. Now, when referring to expectations, I'm referring to two different types of expectations. First, expectations such as class rules. You should always follow the expectations of the permanent teacher, and these should be set at the start of class. And there's also expectations for each activity. So let's talk about classroom rules for a minute. When setting classroom rules, remember that they should be concise, they should be stated in as few amount of words as possible, specific, and instructive, meaning they should tell the student what they can do, not what they can't do. So some examples of classroom expectations include follow the directions the first time they are given. Notice this is short. It's very specific, referring to how to follow directions, and it's instructive. It tells the students what they can do. Second, raise your hand for permission to speak. Again, concise, specific, and instructive. Keep hands, feet, and objects to yourself. And lastly, always walk in the classroom and hallways. So these are some examples of classroom expectations. Now, when setting expectations for each activity, these are like transitioning times. Students need to know 4 things in order to successfully meet your expectations. First, they need to know exactly what it is they are supposed to do. Second, they need to know how they are expected to do it. Third, they need to have and know where the necessary tools are to accomplish this task. And fourth, exactly how much time they have to complete this task. In my first few months of teaching, I was having some major difficulties with a certain class. It was one of those classes that my colleague who had been teaching for 30 years said, "I fear for my life every time those students walk into your classroom." She wasn't the only one. Things were going terribly, but I knew that behavior is largely a product of its immediate environment, and I knew I was creating an ineffective environment. I asked another teacher to come and observe me for a few minutes and tell me what I needed to change. After observing for 15 minutes, she came back with 1.5 pages of suggestions, and I was so grateful to her. She said, "You are training your students not to listen to you. You repeat over and over the same thing. They know if they don't listen, it's not a problem, and they're learning to tune you out." She was completely right. I repeated myself over and over again, thinking the students didn't understand me, and that's why they weren't complying. It was but it was having the opposite effect. What I should have done was something like this. So here's an example. For the next 15 minutes, we are going to be working on our poster projects. For the first 5 minutes, with your other group members, brainstorm what you would like to put on your poster. During the last 10 minutes, each person will sketch on a piece of paper what he or she is going to contribute. Each person will need a piece of paper and a pencil, which I will hand out to you while you are brainstorming. Second, if you want to find out if students understand your expectations, rather than asking any questions, ask specific questions to specific students. For example, I could say, "Mia, how long will we be working on this assignment?" And she would say, 15 minutes. "Great, thank you, Mia." Then I would ask Andre, "What are we going to be doing during the first 5 minutes?" And then he would respond, and I'd say, "Thanks, Andre." And last, I would ask Celeste, what will we be doing for the last 10 minutes? And Celeste will respond. I'll say, "Great, thank you very much. You may begin." When I ask students if they understand, I'm not going to get any responses, but when I ask students individual questions and specific questions to the expectations, I'll know exactly how well they understood the expectations. We often hear from school districts and administrators that teachers and substitute teachers will say, for example, no cell phones should be out during class. And this is a great expectation that should be had. However, they'll often see substitute teachers texting or making calls during the class period. So anytime you set an expectation, be sure that you're willing to model and comply with that expectation yourself. When you don't comply with your own expectation, you're telling the students that it's not really that important. Teachers should always be the most on-task person in the classroom. All right, we're going to review these 4 strategies that I taught you on preventing inappropriate student behavior from happening. First, have a starter activity. Greeting students warmly at the door and then directing them to a starter activity will get them on task immediately. A student who is on task is less likely to misbehave. Strategy 2, use proximity. Be near the students. Continually walk around the classroom and you're wanting to look for appropriate behavior that you can recognize and thank. Strategy 3, recognize and praise appropriate behavior. Realize that the behavior you're going to pay attention to is the behavior that's going to prevail in the classroom. Strategy 4, clearly communicate your expectations and question students about those expectations. And lastly, remember to model and comply with your own expectations. Now, I gave you these 4 simple suggestions. They won't obviously solve all of your inappropriate behavior, but it will create environments where students will more likely behave well. We will, in later seminars, go over how to respond to inappropriate behavior, so be sure to stay tuned for those. Thank you for attending our webinar today. I appreciate you being a part and for how excited everyone seemed for this webinar. And we had such great responses for people. We had to put in additional sessions, and I'm so grateful to that. It looks like I do have a few questions, so we have a couple of minutes left. Let me go over these questions and see what I can do. All right, we have one question asking, what are some appropriate starter activities at the high school level? Great question. I mentioned before that you could ask students to write about any adventures that they had with their best friend. High school students really love anything that's slightly introspective. So you could say, if you were an animal, which animal would you be and why? If you were a flower, which flower would you be and why? Something along the lines of letting them be a little bit introspective where you can learn something about the students. As mentioned before, what song lyrics best describe your life now and why? Or write song lyrics that would teach us a little bit about the certain topic we're working on today. Another question about a starter activity is, do I write things on the board or on a handout? I use the whiteboard or a smartboard all of the time. It is my best friend. Having things written up that students can refer to. You can also have a handout if this is easier for you. You can do this for your own expectations as well. If you don't see any listed in the classroom, having a handout of your expectations that each student can look at and sign saying, I understand these expectations, that's fine as well. All right, and this last question is an excellent one too. I hope we don't go too far over when I respond to it. So when asking students about your expectations, the question says, what if multiple students respond with, I don't know? So when I give an expectation and then I question students about that expectation, a student might say, I don't know. And that will happen commonly. So you go to another student. You're showing the student that they're not going to throw you off. You go to another student and ask, what is the expectation for these first 5 minutes? Well, I don't know. Go to the third student. What is the expectation for this first 5 minutes? Usually, and it's just some miracle, by the third student they realize, oh, we're not going to be able to move on until we answer this question. And the third student will typically answer. You could also direct it at a student you know will answer and answer correctly. So that kind of eases that as well. So by the third student, for sure, you'll get a response. Sadly, we don't have time for any more questions, but please, you're welcome to email me at jessica@steady.org, and I'd be happy to answer those questions or post them to the Bus Stop blog. We often have hundreds of substitute teachers who are willing to answer any problems that you might experience in the classroom. Again, thank you for attending today. I hope you found this helpful. You're welcome to send any feedback to me as well. As I mentioned, we will be recording this webinar, and you can again view it at a later date, so you'll be receiving that email in the next couple of days. Thanks again.